Welcome back to the second half of the Cannabiz Conversation podcast. Joe Hodas joining me, the boss man over at the Wana Brands. He let off the teaser with wanting to talk about the actual environment within our dispensaries. And before we get into that, as customary this year, King Solomon Nutrients designed to make it better and easier to grow almost anything you can think of. If you haven't checked him out, check out KingSolomonNutrients.com. And Damian Solomon is my guy all over LinkedIn. You can find him right now. I believe he's traveling the world on his world domination tour, as I call it. So from hydro to soil, you'll get the best results from the King. Thank you for that. We always appreciate all of our sponsors this year this season on the Cannabiz Conversations podcast. So, Joe, you left us with the idea of today's environment, today's consumer, because you and I were both told that the soccer mom would end up in my dispensary, giving up her Chardonnay and buying my gummies, but she hasn't. And I have a few reasons as to why. It sounds like you do as well. But the bigger part for me was why we're still talking about this, Joe. Why haven't we cracked the nut on this whole thing to open it up and really make it easier? What is your reasoning as to why we're still here?
Well, the great question. The why. I don't know. I mean, because okay. Let me back up. And maybe I do know. So part of it is that we've been trained to think about 2 inches in front of ourselves in this industry because things change so much, right? So frequently, so quickly, and it's so unstable in many ways that we're forced to think 2 inches in front of ourselves versus maybe 5 feet in front of ourselves. And so, what's 2 inches in front of us? Well, what's 2 inches in front of the dispensary is who is buying the majority of products and what is most important to them. So there are heavy consumers who are buying the majority of the product, and they are looking for a price point that fits what they can purchase, right? And so the dispensaries will tend to cater towards that consumer because that's the consumer that's coming into the store. That unfortunately doesn't always jive with creating an environment that feels good for someone who is a first-time consumer, or someone who doesn't know what they're doing, or someone who's only going to buy one product a month, and then when they run out, they're going to come back and they're going to buy something else. And so I get that, right? There are financial pressures that are requiring dispensaries. And I'm not putting this all at the feet of dispensaries, and I'll get to that in a second. But there are certain requirements that dispensaries have to be able to make money, to be able to 280E is a big thing that figures into this. We'll talk about that maybe in a second, but they're catering towards that consumer they know is paying their bills today. And that doesn't allow them then to focus on how do I grow the pie? How do I make this place comfortable and good for that soccer mom you mentioned earlier? But also, how do I train my staff to know as much as they can know about their products so they can be educational and consultative? Unfortunately, in many cases, we're putting 21 and 22-year-old retail workers in a situation where they've got to be able to address someone who comes in and says, well, I have pain here, I can't sleep, or, and to be able to suggest products to them. That's a really challenging place for them to be. So we've got to figure out a way to create a more educational, consultative approach, but we can't put that on the backs of the bud tender. And we also have to have the stores that are able to support products that are able to address this sort of range of experiences that consumers are looking for.
Yeah, it's to me when I walk into a dispensary, I've been going into them, as I said, in the first half from medical use days, right? So back in Denver in 2005, 2006, it was a pretty shady process. Okay, it was weird, but it was less shadier than the way you got it before. So that was a win. But yeah, you'd go in and you'd hit the front door, and it would stink of the great plant. You're like, you knew where you were, you felt okay about it. But as I enter them now, I think about my parents, who, that's why I asked you in the first half who your demo is, because my folks actually closer to the 60 and over demo, actually they are, and they're not my dad, but my mom is like, hey, gummies. But to your point, from a friend, from a this, from a that, mom's not checking in at the dispensary. She thinks, she just doesn't think it's for her. And I said, why don't you want to go in there? Well, what am I supposed to know? Okay, Fair point. She's like, I go to the liquor store, I buy Tito's, I leave. Like, I know how this works. She said, but I don't know what I'm looking for, and I don't know the right dosage, and I don't want to, many moons ago, my wife and I were on the medical scene as medical growers, and my wife was huge into baking. Of course, my mom's like, oh gosh, give me a few of those edible cookies. This will be great. It's, takes one cookie, feels nothing, eats a second cookie, decides to get in the bath and almost dies, right? She almost had to be the one on 911 on YouTube talking about dying from edibles. But it's because she was not listening, right? We made it clear to her, you don't feel anything, you will. Don't worry about it. Just have the one, right? Consumer education. Joe, how do we do it? How do we educate the consumers in a place that is still not federally legal? This show will barely be on Instagram because of shadow bans against the cannabis plant. LinkedIn right now, probably safest place I'm aware of for cannabis running right now. So how do we educate the consumers, Joe? Because I want to help. I want to know how we do it.
Sean, you're asking a great question that, and I hate saying I don't have answers to things, but I don't have a good answer. I mean, because there's really two parts. I mean, you talk about, let's say, LinkedIn. Well, first of all, your mom's not going to LinkedIn to get information, right?
No, she's not, dude. She's not at all. Everyone always jokes that I'm even on there, but yeah, so you're right. Totally.
I mean, she's not. And then also, by the way, there's, we can talk about in-store education as part of it, but how do we even get her to the store, right? How do we,
right.
And it's a little bit of the stigma issue, but it's also, so, what we keep using your mom as an example. I could use my mom too. She's 82. It's not, that that cannabis has a stigma for her in the sense that she uses it for sleep and, because of my association with it, she feels comfortable with it. So it's not like she has anything against cannabis, but she's still not going into a dispensary. That's just not where she wants to be. And she doesn't want to talk to, again, a 22-year-old bud tender who, may or may not have good advice for her or may tell her, well, I usually take 100 milligrams to help me sleep. I mean, we've got a little bit past that.
May or may not be there next week. I mean, the churn in the industry is quite ridiculous as well. And that's difficult.
And I want to be clear, there are some great bud tenders out there. I've experienced wonderful bud tenders who I would be totally comfortable with my mom talking to.
Yep.
But I've also experienced the other side of that, right? And so how do we get better at making it a more welcoming environment, but also then getting over the hump of like, I'll go into a liquor store without even thinking about it, but then I'm like, oh, I got to go get more gummies. I'll get to the dispensary. But it just, for whatever reason, there just feels like there's this process. You got to show your ID, you got to have cash because you can't use my credit card, and it just doesn't feel like the right flow for speaking to a broader consumer. So it's getting them into the store, and then once they're in the store, what we battle with all the time is, we have great educational material. We do tons of trainings. We have great in-store materials that are really education focused to talk about why our products work and what they do and blah, blah, blah. But if, a competitor is on special that week, or they're spiffing the bud tender, or they're giving them free product, that's what they end up recommending.
That's it. That's how it goes. That's a retail environment though, right, Joe? That's not specific to cannabis. I've been in retail my whole life. That has always been the game. It's right. A race to the bottom. It's not about quality. And me as a consumer, I don't look for anything but quality. I get my buddies, we go to conferences all the time. We end up flying out of the same airport. And I always get shit because I sit in the first 4 rows. What are you, an elitist? You have to be up there? No, it's what I prefer to do for convenience. I don't like a lot of people around me, and I like to be able to get on and off the plane as fast as possible. That's why I sit up there. And yeah, I don't mind a couple of free drinks for a 4-hour flight, but it isn't about being an elitist. It's about convenience, about how I spend my money is none of anybody's business. However, publicly, when it's a race to the bottom, the influence to the consumer is so poor. Like, I hate walking to dispensaries. Someone's like, oh, here's the specials for today. And here, don't care. Didn't ask for your specials. Not interested. But because we're in this volume game, the only way apparently to get volume is to lower your price.
Well, and it's this convergence of issues. So that's the big issue, right? And I agree with you. It exists everywhere in retail. But if I go into 7-Eleven and Coca-Cola is on sale that week, and I'm like, oh, I haven't had a Coca-Cola in a while, I'll buy Coca-Cola. Or the bud tender, the person at the counter says, oh, did you see our Slurpee special? Whatever it is, right? Fine, right? Then I might buy something based on the price point because it's on sale that week. But I have an understanding and a knowledge base of what exists in that realm of like possible things that I can drink in a 7-Eleven, in a dispensary. I think we're doing, and I don't mean to sound hippy dippy, but we're doing a disservice to the plant, right? We're making it a commodity when it shouldn't be a commodity, and we're forcing people into an understanding that is not grounded in how it may impact me, what I'm looking for, what experience I want, the real nuances to the plant. And we're grounding it in, this is on special this week, or this company's paying me $1 for every unit I sell, so I'm going to push it. And that does everyone a disservice in my mind.
Right, that's the problem. It's always the same of the pushing. And I'm a brand loyalist. So, right, you just said, hey, Coke's on sale. If I drink Coke, so even if it's the most expensive and everything else on sale, I still buy Coke because that's what I drink, right? That's who I am. And I do the same with cannabis for the most part. I mean, I have brands I like. If someone refers a brand to me, says, hey, you should try this, try that. Okay, cool. Whatever. Of course, I'll give anything a whirl, but I know you're a little bit hard pressed for time. So I want to get to our final 2 closing questions, and you can answer them rapid fire. I know you're hearing a lot about this. Are we good for reschedule or deschedule, Joe? What is Joe's best way forward?
Well, my best way forward would be to deschedule.
Okay.
However, that's not happening. I mean, I think even the reschedule, the Schedule 3 that we're talking about, has a long way to go. I think when Biden, and the administration made that big announcement, of course, it's a bunch of PR for Biden and for his reelection campaign. But in reality, there's so many things that can go wrong between here and there, right? So I don't even know if a reschedule is going to happen. I will take it, right? And you asked the question, which is better? Deschedule is better. I'll take a reschedule because at the very least, you get rid of 280E, which I mentioned earlier. We're going to get back to. For those who don't understand what 280E is, it's one of my most favorite ironies of this industry, that we get taxed as an federally illegal business. We get taxed at a much higher rate than a legal business, so that the IRS can take their money and put it into the same banks that we're not allowed to bank with.
Correct.
So we,
and then you can't write off any of it. You can't do anything within your own publication. I said this earlier. If I didn't have the ability, if I had 280E, I would never run my own business. I would never.
Yeah, I
wouldn't be 11 years in with having the ability to do nothing on every other business had the ability to do.
Every cannabis business that's operating at the level that the IRS wants to operate at is paying upwards of, depending upon how much plant touching they're doing, upwards of 60% effective tax rates, which is really, really difficult to run a business that way. So the taxes are super onerous. So if Schedule 3 happens, that 280E tax goes away, which is going to be huge. It means businesses can focus on their business versus paying tax, and that potentially new dollars come in, which I think helps everybody. And by the way, Wana is not quite as subject to 280E. We're a manufacturer, so we get to claim cost of goods sold, which is a big part of our expense. So, we're not quite as exposed to 280E as other businesses are. But what's good for the industry is good for us. So that's great. But I think, ultimately, I don't think what I've seen over the last 10 years is that we are a political ping pong as an industry. I get on my most cynical days, I look at it and I go, why are we participating in these groups that are trying to affect regulation through lobbying? Because at the end of the day, the logic doesn't play into this, and at the end of the day, having a good case as to why something should be decriminalized or rescheduled is almost irrelevant, because if this person or this party doesn't like this person in this party, or it gets attached to a bill that this group doesn't like and they want to kill, we're in the middle of all that. So I feel very, very much like we just have such little control sometimes. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, the political side of it's hard. A couple of my buddies in the past have said we're just not as well organized as alcohol, firearms, tobacco, right? Like, you don't have the people, we don't have the pull nationally in that way to really be on that hill to matter. But to your point, I'm asking people to be logical, and this discussion, because it's an illegal drug, is not a logical one. And it happens a lot with people. Joe, last question. You were a cannabis consumer, and it might be a loaded question given your business structure, but how does Joe like to consume his cannabis?
Well, I gummies are my number one format, partially because I have access to them, and partially because I like them, but also because I have 3 kids, and smoking a big joint in the middle of my living room is not really an option. I will say that when I do get to smoke flower, it's kind of like special occasion, right? It's like opening a good bottle of wine, because I'm like, oh, I can smoke flower. The kids and the wife are out of town, or whatever it is. So that's one component. And then I have some vape brands that I trust, and I generally will consume only live rosin. And, I don't know if that's just a mental thing for me to think that it's better than distillate or something else, but I try to look at the hardware and the oil that I'm using, but it's infrequent. So I don't feel as concerned about the health benefits because I'm not chiefing on that all day. And so, yeah, those are my three formats. So gummies first, vape second, flower third.
And the flower when available, man, I love it. I knew it would be a little bit loaded with the gummies. I figured that. I like that. Mine is probably just flower. Sometimes I get into gummies ever so often. Again, around sleep, like you talk about, right? That's the bigger part. So, Joe, man, thank you so much for your time. You have been an unbelievable guest, and I really look forward to having you back. We need to jump even more into you taking over as the boss CEO of the Wana Brands. But to hear your journey to how you got there, your relationship with Nancy was really, really cool, man.
Thanks, Sean. I really appreciate you having me, and I've enjoyed it. So I'd love to be back on at some point.
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. And again, we'd like to thank King Solomon Nutrients, designed to simplify the growing process, rooted in over 2 decades of experience, backed by science. Nobody does it better. It is a simple 2-step process that when you see the cost of it will absolutely blow your mind. So if you're not down with the King, you should be. Thank you guys so much. And don't forget, the goal of this show, the goal of my own advocacy as a human being, is to remove the stigma of this plant and uplift it to its rightful place in society. Thank you all so much. Join us next time on the Cannabiz Conversations podcast.